The Banking Scene Director's Cut goes behind the scenes, sharing stories and insights to help you build the bank of tomorrow.
Hey, Andrew, getting nervous for next week?
Not at all. I think it's going to be one of our best Luxembourg events yet. We've got a great sign-up and audience and speakers. So
Yeah.
I'm
No,
looking
absolutely.
forward to it.
Yeah. But it is not our first activity we organized this year. For the first time since, I believe, 2023, we held a virtual meetup again. Not the Banking Scene After Work, not the Banking Scene Breakout Bites, but for the first time, a Banking Scene Live edition, a proper webinar. Half presentation, half discussion. And this time it was on fraud, an introduction for the research that you are currently conducting, both desk research, interview-based, etc., on the current trends, the current state of fraud, and what banks can do to reduce that. What do you think about our first edition? It was pretty amazing, wasn't it?
I think it was brilliant. I mean, the content provided by Jorij was interesting, insightful, provocative, made you think. Very engaged audience as well, very attentive. The follow-up afterwards, we've had a number of people, actually most of the audience, have gone back and viewed the recording. Sorry to those people listening to this, but it's only available to strategic and growth members. Get hold of us if you want to know more. But it was a great start to our live webinars. And I'm going to be having a conversation with Jorij later on this week that we will be able to publish,
There we
because
go.
that will be in interviews. Those who missed out on the webinar, you'll at least be able to get some form of a hint. But there were some things that came out of that were a little bit eye-watering and a little bit scary for me. I don't know about for you.
I was amazed by, I knew there were entire scam factories, but seeing an actual image of such not just a room or building, but an entire village of people dedicated to fraud, that was for me eye-opening. And then again, I didn't see a lot of new, but seeing it in another perspective, that was eye-opening and gives me even more respect to the people working in fraud for doing the job they do, because it is nearly impossible to do that fight for fraud, because very often, and that was one of the first things that I thought is remarkable, but again, not new from the blog you wrote. Most of the people that are victim of fraud are manipulated into choosing to send money, share data, or grant access. How do you fight that?
Yeah, that was an interesting one that made you think when Jorij said it's the only form of financial crime that you willingly participate in. You are a willing victim up until the point you realize it's been a scam. And that gives a big psychological issue around people.
A bit. Further on in your blog, you refer to another eye-opener, which was that in Belgium, I believe was number 3, money recovering scams. About people that have been scammed that are targeting again to so-called solve the problem and return the money. And they're scammed again. The average loss in Belgium per scam, €1,000. If you get scammed again, another 2,000. For most people, that is many months of salary. Most people, for a lot of people, let's say.
Yeah. And the fact that very often the scammers that scammed you in the first place then have got another arm of their same, let's say, scam factory that then re-scams you, promising to get your money back is, yeah. But going back to your first point about the scam factories and the size of them, I mean, there were a couple of things, just because you had brought it up, that was the same thing that scared me, was that photograph of KK Park. Acres of buildings, 20,000 people in there, most of them coerced. Jorij mentioned Chinese mafia. KK Park is situated in Myanmar.
The exact wording were, when they found that village, they found 2,000 scammers, but they estimated it was about 20,000. So 18,000 flew away.
Yes, yeah.
Fled.
Yeah, and related to that, he also gave us some statistics on scamming as a percentage of GDP. It's become significant to a lot of those economies. So Myanmar, for example, he said equates to 23% of their GDP. That figure goes up. Cambodia, equivalent to 30% of their GDP. And Laos, equivalent to 68.5% of their GDP, is the revenue from scamming. Now, in some ways, you think there is little incentive for those governments to actually crack down on these fraud factories because the money is flowing in and being spent in the economy. Now, that is an international problem that is not easy to combat. He also put up
Puts the
some.
remittance business in a different perspective, huh?
Well, this is it. He also put up some text message exchanges and some social media posts in places like Ghana and Nigeria, where he said there's an entire generation of parents that are encouraging their children to skip university and go to scam school. And he said there are literal scam schools that will teach you how to become a scammer. And the parents are proud. Oh, my son's a scammer. He earns more money than anybody of his friends that go to university. How do we compete against this? I mean, as you say, I have a
It's all about
huge
psychology. They believe they're the Robin Hood of 2026, and we think they're criminals. And at the end, it's not a technological game, it's a psychological game, which is why I believe it's very good that we got an expert in that specific field also for the conference in Brussels on May 28th. Because we can talk about technology as much as we want, but we will not solve the issue as long as people remain convinced that or manipulated into choosing to send money. Because there's not a lot of technology that can help with that. And we've been discussing the confirmation of pay and instant payments regulation, which leaves out some of the potential solutions as well. Like, for example, the short period of time that allows people to rethink their decision to send money or not. With instant payments, that's all gone. So in that moment of the conviction that they're doing the right thing, or maybe the stress of not helping someone fixes they love or anything like that, in that stress, they need to send the money instantly. Afterwards, when they believe they are talking to someone who can help them get the money back, the same thing happens. Again, they will manipulate you in the fact that it needs to go speedy and that you need to be fast, etc., etc. And instant payments only helps with that. So I'm very curious to see how that will evolve going forward. And that was quite a big debate after Jorij's presentation, where he also advised the industry perhaps not just to check the name attached to an account, but also specify whether it's a business account or personal account, and more like the specific characteristics of an account on top of the name that's linked to it. And I think that makes a lot of sense.
And one of our attendees, one of our guests, had actually pointed out that in the Netherlands, that is becoming more common, using an external third-party service like the fraud risk indicator by SurePay, that gives that enhanced and enriched data. So it's not just the confirmation of payee, verification of payee. It's actually then giving you some context around the account, which is very important. I was a bit concerned when another one of our guests had brought up that verification of payee in some cases is actually working to the benefit of fraudsters. Now, that was not one I had foreseen. That one came out of left field. And the guest had said that the problem is that the mule account that is being used for the scamming, very often invoice scamming, appears to be the actual legitimate account because the invoice says acting on behalf of and gives a real company name. And he said the problem comes in that some companies actually use third-party agents to collect money on their behalf. So
It's
the
not
whole
just like it's also banks. When I have one of the big banks, when they buy tickets for the banking scene, it's always going through a third-party supplier.
So this acting on behalf of is something that a lot of people within that environment, within accounts payable, and that they're used to it.
Mm.
And so the problem becomes that suddenly the mule account becomes a verified account trusted within that ecosystem, and invoice scams can be quite large, significantly larger than an individual scam. So that was a bit of a concern, and something where this fraud risk indicator kind of a thing could help. Because if that mule account has only been established last month or last week or, a couple of months old, and yet it's supposed to be acting on behalf of a big organization, that could give cause for thought, let's just say.
Yeah, it's amazing what kind of a scale business it is. Another number that came from your blog, which was part of the webinar, was the number of encounters a person has per year when it comes to scams. And Belgium knows 216. And I'm not surprised by it if I look at my mailbox. And it's very easy. Definitely with the whole rise of AI, and maybe in the future even agentic, because those fraudsters in Nigeria or anywhere else, they may get redundant the moment that you can all automate all of those activities. So it gets simply worse and worse. Is that part of the research that you're currently conducting as well?
So where I'm curious, and part of the research is very definitely trying to establish the industry appetite for some of the tools that Jorij had mentioned at the end that GASA is actually establishing and has established. For example, the Global Signal Exchange launched with Google and Oxford Information Labs, where it now has over 32 companies that are sharing scam indicators, and which is, bad sites, emails, phone numbers, that kind of a thing. And they're reportedly receiving over 1 million signals a day, scam signals a day. Now, what he didn't mention is banks participating within that. And, well, because a lot of the banks are still saying that in Europe, regulation prevents them from sharing information. This has come up repeatedly even in our roundtable dinners and in our events.
Yeah, privacy concerns.
Yeah, privacy concerns. And it was disappointing for me we ran a quick poll right at the end, asking people what their investment priority would be to reduce fraud over the next year. And while 50% of them said they're looking at behavioral analytics of some sort, behavioral device profiling, that kind of a thing, and 33% of them mentioned agentic AI, only 8% of the respondents said that they are looking at inbound signals and collaborative sharing of things like mule accounts, which was disappointingly low for me.
Right, but if you know that you can't share it, why would you put your investment agenda?
Well, surely if the industry gets together and expresses a common interest, we saw it very clearly at our roundtable dinner that we had in Brussels, where it was payments professionals around the table, and it was pretty much a unanimous feeling that everybody said we should be sharing this data, but we can't.
Yes.
There was a common
There's
understanding.
a clear understanding they can't. So why would they put it on the investment agenda if it is legally impossible?
Because surely trying to move the needle to change the regulation, somehow lobbying, forming an industry body, doing
That's going
something.
on, I think, but that's not part of an investment cycle. So I believe you should have reframed the question, perhaps.
Well, perhaps if I wanted to skew the data in my behalf, but that is something that I am going to be explicitly asking in the interviews: is what are you doing about it? And it will be something that I'll bring up with Jorij as well, because there are certain professionals within the industry that says the regulation does not explicitly exclude us from sharing this data, and that there's perhaps some confusion that needs to be worked out through the industry.
Yeah, let's hope so. But I'm sure the fraud professionals have much deeper discussions about it than we will ever have.
Hopefully, they'll share some of those outcomes with me.
Yeah,
In the
hopefully.
interviews. I mean, can I just ask you, in Belgium, do you have this service on your phone whereby it can automatically detect or warn you of suspected spam calls? Do you have
the
that capability?
discussion? I told you we haven't. And I had a discussion. That's an interesting one. I recently had lunch with someone else. He's a foreigner living in Brussels now who faced the same problem. And the only way he could activate that service was by having his iPhone registered in the United States instead of here.
Interesting.
So it is local law that doesn't allow it. Now, in the meantime, those UK calls, and I hope they didn't come from you, but every day I used to get these calls from a security officer telling me that my wallet got hacked and that I need to give him information, even though I don't have a wallet. But on a daily basis, came with another phone number, the same message, and there was not much I could do about it. Now, after a week or 2 weeks, it stopped. But the service that you refer to and that other person referred to, we don't have that.
And so the reason why I bring that up is that has worked phenomenally well for me, fantastically well, from a phone call perspective. And Jorij had mentioned that the old channels are still the most common channels where fraud begins very often with a phone call. It's phone
Channel
call
people
and
trust the most.
phone call, email, WhatsApp, the three most common channels, with Facebook then coming in at number 4 in terms of the common channels for the scam to initiate, to begin. And so I have, over the last couple of months, had the primary one of those almost completely eliminated. When I say almost completely, is I see that somebody's tried to phone me. My phone flags up suspected scam, and it then forces the person to leave a voicemail instead of, I can answer the call if I want to, but it forces the person to. And I am getting about 3 or 4 of those a day at the moment, and I just ignore them. I see my phone flash up and it just says suspected spam, and then
Yeah, I
it just,
experienced that.
so I know that in my email, we've all got spam email boxes. Unfortunately, sometimes our banking scene emails end up in people's email boxes. By the way, I had a comment from a fraud professional exactly why that happens. And it was to do with joining this fraud webinar that we held. I had sent round a general email to those people who were eligible to attend, and a fraud professional came back to me and he said, you do realize that asking a fraud professional to click on a link is not going to get you very far. And he said, all links are removed by our email service. And so I said to him, genuine question. The only way to register for this webinar is on the website. How do I direct you to the right website for you to be able to click on the link to register for the webinar? It's removing the capability that, not just that we have got used to it, it's removing functionality from people's, because they are very, very tight. Sorry?
Creating friction in the process.
Not only creating friction, but completely removing it. So he said, if you want to guarantee that your emails get through to me, don't use any overly urgent language. He said, if you use the word urgent in the subject line, it's going to go to spam. Finished. So he said, that's the first flag that we look for. And he works in a bank, right? He said, the second thing is a single URL anywhere in the body of the email, it'll be stripped out. He said more than one URL in the body of the email, it'll be flagged to spam. So he said that in the first instance, I will probably get the email, but the URL will be stripped out and I won't be able to click on anything. He said, but if there's more than 2, it's going to go to my spam.
And what was the solution? How can
Well, he didn't have a solution. He said, send me the link over WhatsApp. So the problem and this takes us back to
That's the
your
creativity we're dealing with in organizing e-conferences and selling tickets.
So this links back to something that Jorij had brought up as well, where he said, unfortunately, this kind of a nervousness and friction is actually impacting people significantly. And he told a story about a person who was stranded on the top of a mountain, hiker, who didn't answer calls from the rescuers, the emergency service, because he didn't recognize the number. So he didn't answer the calls. I mean, when our methods that we are using to deal with fraud starts impacting our lives and the way that we are used to using, that's not going to work. That's not long-term sustainable.
And there's still a lot of friction in the process. Yesterday, I want to renew my OpenAI subscription, and I was incapable doing so. I contacted my bank, and they said everything was okay with the credit card. So I had to contact the processor, who then noticed that it was a potential fraud. But then I wonder, based on what can you possibly determine whether that a payment to OpenAI, huge corporate, could potentially be fraudulent? But of course, I'm not a fraud specialist, so I don't know the reasoning behind it. 2 hours later, I was able to do it because they unflagged the transaction. But it shows that, on the one hand, of course, there are technological solutions and there's much more to do going forward. On the other hand, there's also a lot of education to be done, and probably in a way that is different than the way we used to treat it in the past. And that's also going to be part of the conversation in Brussels at our fraud stage. I'm very curious to see what kind of conclusions you will come up with in your research as well.
Very curious to hear from any fraud professionals that work in a bank that are listening to this.
Or maybe a
how I can get my emails through to you. That's if they're allowed to listen to this, because they might not be able to access YouTube or podcasts or anything like that. But I think it's time to wrap up this week's episode. We have hit our time limit there, and I look forward to the event next week and hopefully welcoming some of our listeners there in Luxembourg on Tuesday the 27th.
Absolutely.
When we kick off our new theme of rethinking relevance that will go across our next 3 conferences.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you, Rick.
Cheers. Bye-bye.